All right. Hello, Eric. Welcome to the next big idea. Thrilled to have you join us for this Q&A. How are you doing today?
Great to be here, man.
I remember I had the pleasure of interviewing you for the podcast, Next Big Idea, back in, I think it was early summer.
Yeah.
And since then, I've made, I think, about 535 new friends. So thank you.
I mean, that next week.
Yeah, it was a big week. No, actually, but it did make me very deliberate and thoughtful about my existing friendships, which was great because I want to talk to you about this a little to start things off. I used to have like this hermit fantasy, which is not as sexy as it sounds. And essentially, it's this idea that, things go wrong or I kind of feel fed up. I just go off and live in the woods alone and I'd be fine, like a little adjustment period, learn to raise crops or whatever. But then your entire book pretty much says that that fantasy would fall apart and that I would be miserable.
I mean, it was hysterical for me. I'm writing this entire book during pandemic lockdown, and I'm reading about the horrors of loneliness and how important friends are for health and happiness. And I'm like, great, it's like researching nutrition while just stuffing your face with trans fats.
Yeah.
Was not I am doing everything wrong. That's all I know.
What is so bad about, I guess we can flip it, right? What's so important about relationships? There are health outcomes, there's happiness outcomes. Like, what is it? I mean, I know you've done tons of research on this.
I mean, we're a social species. It's totally like one of the things that most surprised me when I was researching the book was the issue of loneliness, where Faye Alberti, a researcher at University of York, she went back and before the 19th century, like the word loneliness as an experience kind of almost didn't exist. Basically the word was there, but it meant by itself. It didn't have the negative stigma simply because loneliness didn't really exist. We were always embedded in religions, nations, tribes, villages, because you couldn't survive on your own. It was like, now we have this option that has kind of almost never existed before.
Mm-hmm.
Like I tell the hermit story in the book because it's so rare. And, it's like that was kind of never in the design plans. It's like a bug in the system. And so this is, what we're dealing with. So many people living alone and having so few connections is pretty much unprecedented.
Do you think it's, not to get big picture and wrong, but I think a lot about the sort of Western frontier movement. And, that's such a mythologized part of American culture, where you're striking out. And that's a kind of like solitude, like there's no one around, you're in these big empty spaces. But those were the exceptions, right? Like most people still lived in their little groups and tribes and towns.
Well, I mean, you were still on like the wagon train with your family.
That's true. You didn't go by yourself on a horse.
It's like exactly like you were still with the other marauders who were attacking people, or you were with your family. It was like the idea of just completely, it's like in the past. I mean, big cities couldn't exist because the ability to make that much food, you would need so much agriculture to support a city that size. Before we had like modern fertilizer and whatever else, it's like it wasn't an option to veer that far, and one bad season you're dead. So it was like we needed other people. It was like being living on a mountaintop wasn't a great option, and right now skulking from your Pain Cave apartment to 7-Eleven and back isn't a great option either.
That's true. Pain Cave apartment is a little heartbreaking. Let's talk about friendship then, because when we first shared that we're going to have this live Q&A with you, we had a lot of members sending in questions, and most of them were about friendship. So I thought that was fascinating because you cover tons of things. You talk about love. I would think, oh, everyone's going to ask about like marriages and love and parenting, but it was friendship. That was the first question everybody asked.
Well, we get there are tons of books on marriage and love and children, and there's a whole institution behind that. It's like you'll pay for a marriage therapist, you'll pay for a child therapist. There's no friend therapist. Friendship, as I talk about the book, it's like friendship doesn't have an institution behind it, which makes it really fragile. There's no clear rules or boundaries, and we don't get a lot of information. And the most important part was this was difficult for me. Was that writing the book, the marriage section was so difficult because there's so much information, and the friendship section was so difficult because there's so little information.
And is that because, I mean, why do you think there's such a dearth of studies in the literature?
Because there's no industry behind it.
Oh,
You know,
I see. There's no profit, right?
Friendship friendship therapists don't exist. It's like marriage therapists. They need that information. People will pay for that information. It's like friendships. Like I was happy to read the research and learn.
Right.
It just, especially when you see how critical it is. When Robin Dunbar at Oxford, looked at 1 year after a heart attack, what determines whether you're alive or not? It was whether you smoke and how many friends you have. And certainly nutrition, exercise matters, but those two were so far above everything else. It was extremely predictive just to know, does somebody smoke? How many friends do they have? For health outcomes, a number of studies, breast cancer studies in women, heart attack studies in men, you consistently saw that, spousal support was not nearly as predictive as number of friends, engagement with friends. And then for happiness, it's really off the charts. Like happiness, is happiness, friendship is our number one source of happiness in terms of relationships. If you have, if you have 3 friends at work, you're 96% more likely to be happy with your life. Now, 3 friends at work, not happy with your job, happy with life. That's a huge distinction. Only 20% of people consider their manager at work to be a close friend, but those people like their jobs 2.5 times as much.
Wow, those are huge stats. Okay. So that brings us to a good question we have from one of our authors, one of our members, Erin Petershik. She said, I'm interested in the author's thoughts on losing friendships in adulthood. During the pandemic, we saw both losses and reconnections. It'd be interesting to hear his take.
Yeah, I mean, after 7 years, half of close friends are no longer close friends. It's like there is a rotation. That Robin Dunbar has the Dunbar number. It's like how many kind of relate, and you see this consistently through businesses, military units, everything that, 150, but there are tiers, your acquaintances, close friends, and they rotate. Somebody moves out of being first string and becomes second string. So it's a big issue, especially post-pandemic. Now, granted, some of those people, maybe it's good you're not in touch with anymore. Maybe it wasn't such a great relationship. That's fine. But we all need to do some work to kind of revitalize those friendships that we want to maintain. And the good news here is, the silver lining is, we have a great excuse, which is pandemic. It's like we've all been through it. We all dealt with it. We've all let things kind of slide. So to kind of reconnect with people is a lot less awkward, because you can just be like, throw down the pandemic card. Pandemic, it's like, okay, and you can do your best to reach out and reconnect with people.
And totally, and also I think that we very often overestimate how sort of offended that someone will be that we've sort of dropped off the radar. We're like, oh, I can't reach out now because my friend Mark sent me an email and it's been 9 months, and but Mark probably doesn't really care that much. It's very nice just to get the message, like, hey, great to hear from you. So I think we really overthink it when it comes to that.
Oh, I mean, most people are not going to be offended. Like I said, we all have this thing in common. Maybe they don't reply, but that's probably the more likely negative scenario. But overall, again, I think everybody's kind of dealing with this. It's great. And that's, from both friendships, but also with business contacts. There's a lot of research in terms of business contacts. The most effective way to do this is dormant ties. There are people you've been in touch with who you haven't. This is like card counting for friends and relationships, where it's like, if you're reaching out to somebody you don't know, probably a low likelihood of success. You're reaching out to somebody who you knew for years, far higher likelihood. It's like, it's great to start with kind of those dormant ties and revitalize them.
Heidi Burnett has a kind of a follow-up question where she said, how do you discuss the impact on a friendship when one of you moves and the ability to spend time together is gone? So what?
That's really that's really tough. I mean, that's one of the reasons why, after 7 years, close friends aren't close friends. We move. But luckily we do have technology, like social media. We're always seeing stuff goes back and forth. Social media can help, social media is horrible. But what the research is consistent on is if you're using social media to kind of like stay in touch with those dormant friends or to set up time to see those friends, it's an unalloyed good. If you're using it to replace, friendships, not such a great thing. So the best thing there is, is to build a ritual. It's like you're going to touch base once, first day of every month. You're going to do something where it's established, it's on the calendar. It's a consistent thing you do, as opposed to like, oh, I have to reach out to them. We'll see. Procrastination bugs us all. So to just find something that we regularly tune in about, or if you have an interest in common, favorite TV show, sports, whatever, you can use that as an anchor to stay in touch around.
Yeah, you could do sort of like a Monday recap if you're into like House of Dragons or whatever show it is.
Absolutely. It's like you kind of need that like medium to move through, that that topic to kind of like structure things around.
Oh, I love that idea. And do you find that people need to, like, what if I'm sort of type A, theoretically, and love to schedule everything?
He can neither confirm nor deny.
Right. And my friend is kind of more, just have as you do. And so do I need to be like, hey, let's talk every Saturday? Or is it okay if I'm just like, you know what, I'm going to call him every Saturday at noon. And then if I get him, I get him. Like, is it important to the ritual that both people are sort of like deliberately participating?
I mean, basically it's like, reach out, give it a shot, see if there's reciprocity. I mean, that's what you're looking for. If it's always you reaching out, okay, maybe they appreciate it, but maybe they're not prioritizing it. On the flip side, it's like if you do it one week, they do it the next week, you do it the next week. It's like just getting that feedback where it's like, because we've all got the people who reach out constantly. We got the people who reach out relatively consistently, and then we got the people who reach out when they need something. And it's like just take the first step. It's like that's really critical, and we forget how much we appreciate it. We're afraid of bugging people. There's a bunch of research on this that it's like we think we're going to annoy someone, and the truth is when it's somebody we like, it's like it's fantastic. They did the heavy lifting, so it's worth it to just send, like if it makes you feel more comfortable, it's like send 5 texts at a time. It's like then if you only get hear from 1 or 2 people, you still feel good versus like I sent one, they rejected. Okay, I'm never talking to anyone for the rest of my life. You want to do that, but it's so worth it. It's just we kind of get anxious.
Yeah, I have a friend, and he whenever I reach out to him, if he's feeling low or depressed or something going on, he just doesn't get back to me. And for a while, I took that personally. I think like, okay, well, guess I'm not a priority to you. And then I sort of, the more I got to know him, I've known him now for almost 20 years, I realized, oh, he just kind of goes into this like dark place and doesn't really respond to anyone. And so then I found that if I reach out to him and I don't hear back, then I would make an extra effort to actually see him in person. And I would say like, hey, let's get dinner. And we would sort of, and he would rally and we'd go, and every time we'd be glad we did it. And now we sort of kind of institutionalized that. We'll just check in on each other like once a month. And it's been good, but it took a little, I mean, sort of customized to a personality. Like I found out, whereas other people will reach out when they're feeling bad to me.
No, but you mean, that's a really good point where it's like, in the book, when I talk about like, like meeting people for the first time, first impressions, somebody can be a great person who makes a negative first impression. You don't talk to them again. You never get a chance to disprove your inaccurate theory, versus like you had feelings about it, but you still reached out, you still tried. And then you realize, oh no, this is going on. We've all had issues where, you text somebody, they don't text you back. You wait a little while, you text them, they don't text you back, and you're irritated. And then it's like, oh, we just had a medical emergency. We just had a baby. We're fleeing the law. Like, something big happened, and you're like, oh, okay, those things happen, and it's like you have to give it that shot, because things come up, things are crazy, especially the past few years.
Do you have any, have you done any research or looked into the differences between sort of introverts and extroverts? Because I imagine that I have a son, he's super extroverted, and I have a daughter who's super introverted, and I watch their friendships because they're in middle school, and they are totally different. Like my son he'll be gone for 8 hours at a time, and my daughter will send me texts like, "Hey, please send me an excuse for why I can't go over to my friend's house." So, like, how do and especially juggling friendships between those two personality types?
I mean, again, this is like we were talking about, where it's like
Mhm.
giving somebody a second chance, third chance. It's like to realize, oh, like you said, your friend gets depressed.
Right.
That's not such a good time. Well, in that same way, we kind of realized there was a story. I think it was a Moth Talk. There was a New
Mhm.
Yorker writer who was talking about he had his son was in middle school, and just started into the teen years, was just really didn't want to talk to dad. But then if he texted his son's in the other room, but if he texted his
Oh
son,
yeah.
oh, all of a sudden it's like that. It's just his son, like many kids, just preferred to text. You try and talk to him
Right.
face to face, it's yes, no. Get him texting, oh yeah, sure, happy to
Yeah.
talk. It's like it's like when we give people a second chance, you start to realize, oh, some people get depressed, some people prefer the phone, some people prefer email. It's like
Mhm.
we give ourselves a chance. Everybody has their little idiosyncrasies, to be patient about that. We all have, I have mine, you have yours.
Mhm.
We get a chance to see like what works better for people.
Right. I'm a big fan of the call my friends while I'm driving technique. I'm like, all right, I'm stuck in the car for an hour. Like, I'll go. What's Ben up to? What's Alexia up to? And I'll just reach
It's
out to old friends.
I mean, that's a great system, because it doesn't feel like a burden to you.
Yeah. And my friend Sam calls me all the time when he's walking his dog. I'm like,
Yep.
okay, Sam's walking his dog again. I always know because yeah.
Exactly. I mean, well, it's like for some people, it's like it's easier when they're running an errand, they're doing something,
Mhm.
and for other people, it's like there's chaos at the office, maybe there's chaos at home. Walking the dog is the only time that I can actually talk to a friend and like pay attention.
Yeah. Uh, so one question is, in this changing work landscape we've got right now with so much remote work, and some hybrid stuff. So how do we develop friendships with coworkers when we're not around them much? I mean, it seems like it's a real challenge.
I mean, that's a tricky thing, but it's like
Yeah.
that's where it gets into the issue of kind of like stepping outside of work topics. Where
Mhm.
do you have, key thing Dale Carnegie talks about that's been validated by the research is similarity. And if
Right.
you find an interest, a topic, movies, TV shows, sports, something outside of the workplace that you're passionate about, you can start checking in about that. You don't have to send an email about the report or the PowerPoint. You can send an
Mhm.
email about, hey, that new episode, of the TV
Mhm.
show, that latest sports game, whatever it is, finding a passion that's outside of that,
Mhm.
and just making sure that's an issue. And again, going first is key. Is once you've established that thing, reach out, text, email about something that has nothing to do with work, and you can start to build up something that extends beyond the meeting we have tomorrow.
Right. Yeah, you write a lot in the book about making friendships more deeper, right? How do you go deeper, going from transactional to like a real friendship? And so, what are the key sort of steps on that?
I mean, the two big things for deepening relationships
Mhm.
are time and vulnerability.
Right.
Making the time is obviously kind of key, but
Mhm.
also it's a strong signal. If you're making the time for somebody, time is always scarce. So making the time is a strong signal, and when somebody reciprocates and makes the time for you, that's a strong signal. But vulnerability, kind of analogous to similarity,
Mhm.
we'll all meet somebody new, and like you kind of hit that threshold, that acquaintance threshold, where it's like I can't push past talking about the weather, like
Totally.
but like that's where vulnerability comes in. Much like similarity, either you have something in common, or you talk about how you're feeling about something. Because I think
Mhm.
if we pay attention, if we notice, you can realize that my conversations with coworkers, my conversations with acquaintances, and my conversations with close friends, the content is very different. You know,
Yeah.
it's like there's certain people I will talk about, you know, the problems I'm having with my kids. There are certain people I will talk about, you know, just TV shows. And there's certain people where, yeah, let's get the work done. And as soon as the work's done, we're done talking until there's more work. And it's just kind of broadening that, where I will mention something else. I will ask a pointed question about something that steps outside. And, you know, it's a little scary, but it's worth it. And again, if they don't reciprocate, you know, okay, then it's like, you know, try again with somebody else.
Yeah. There are also, I think, certain kind of like cultural prompts to deepening friendship. Like I know that from my experience, like if I share a meal with someone, like
Yeah.
there's lunch, which is, but then dinner is more intimate, right? To me, it's like, oh, if I'm gonna have dinner with someone, that's kind of a bigger step. And
Yeah.
so I've even have a friend, and we're sort of like, we were fledgling friends for a while, and then of course pandemic hit, and we started to have, once in a while we'd have like a Zoom lunch together,
Yeah.
and so we would just sit and like chat, and just the fact of like munching on a sandwich, even though it's virtual, somehow felt like it was more significant than just texting or emailing somebody.
No, I mean, that's the kind of thing where I think, again, we realize that there's a difference between acquaintances and close friends, but we don't usually look at the content, either whether it's the conversation or kind of like you're talking about, where it's a deeper experience. Like last year, there was a bachelor party weekend, and it was amazing for me to see that, like, there are plenty of people I've spent far more hours with, you know, that I don't feel a level of comfort and connection. But after this bachelor party weekend, it was like, there are guys there who I never knew before, who I know now, who I would feel totally comfortable, like texting them, emailing them. I've known them for a grand total of 2 days, but it was a deeper, richer experience. You know, we did like an escape room and like some cool stuff like that, where you work together on something. And it was just like a much more rich kind of like experience, had a higher thread count. You know, it was like, so all of a sudden, even though it's far fewer hours, like those hours meant more because it wasn't just like, hi, how are you over coffee?
Absolutely. I sort of did an A/B test accidentally in my life where I had tickets to see a concert. And so I invited a friend. I was like, hey, you want to come? And he lived far away, but he came out. So we had grabbed a bite to eat, and then we went to the show, and we had a great time. And then a band was playing 5 months later, and I bought tickets. And I just didn't, I thought maybe my wife would want to go, or my daughter. Anyway, they did not want to go. So finally it came to the day of, and I thought, oh God, I guess I'll ask my friend. But I felt kind of bad, like last minute. Anyway, I asked him. He wasn't in town. He was traveling for work. So I thought, okay, I guess I'll just go by myself. And I don't know if you've ever gone to a concert by yourself, but it is pretty sad. It's a pretty. I mean, I always tell my kids, like, oh, I don't mind. Like, I'll see movies by myself. I'll eat by myself. I don't get lonely. But this was like, oh my God, this is like Ghost of Christmas Future or something sad. I mean, so I go in and I'm just by myself, and it's so communal, right? Everybody's jumping around, and there's music, and then there's just me, like standing in a crowd, feeling just profoundly lonely. And I actually left early. I thought, this just sucks. I'm not enjoying this. So I left and came home, and I thought, right, I'm never doing that again. Like, this is a group. It's a shared experience.
No, but it's like, you know, the downside was it wasn't that fun. You left early, but it's like, you know, you're not going to avoid concerts. It's just, you know, from now on, it's like, it's essential to have somebody else there. Like, it's really powerful. You know, I mean, both in friendships and love and like all these, to just enjoy these experiences with someone else. You know, like, it's, to me, that's that feedback loop. You know, it's like, it's so powerful. And when somebody else isn't there, you realize just why don't I just listen to Spotify at home? You know, it's like, it's not, it's like, you're not getting the full experience. And those are so powerful for deepening friendships.
Right. So this is, so there's another question from a member named Robert George, and he said, what's the difference between a sibling and a friend? And I mean, I think there's an obvious difference, but I guess maybe he means sort of like a sibling relationship versus a friend relationship. Did you research this at all? Or
I mean, the thing is that, you know, often often sibling relationships, become some of our closest friendship relationships.
Mhm.
That's what we've seen from the research is that people often with parents, there still is, like, even though they're not taking care of you and feeding you anymore, there
Mhm.
there still is, though, I don't want to upset mom, dad's gonna, be judgmental about this.
Right.
Sibling relationships are so powerful because they can transition easily into friendships. And this is somebody that's known you your whole life. It's
Mhm.
like, I'm an only child, and when I was, growing up, I loved being an only child. Like, it was fantastic. It was like, this is great. It's so much easier to emotionally blackmail my parents when I'm the only kid. It was just like,
Right.
I mean, but now I look at friends who have had, they've had people who've known them their whole lives and who
Mhm.
can see trends. So, like, their siblings can say, it's like they can say, "Oh, I'm so worried about this," and their sibling, you always do this, like,
Right.
you're going to be fine. You always get through this. You worry about it. That's so powerful to have people who can say over 20 years, or who also can tell you, wow, that thing you were struggling with, that thing, you've gotten so much better. Like, that's really powerful, and it's really worth it to invest in those.
Oh, that's nice to hear. Yeah, it's true. It's sometimes it can be unnerving when I have a sister and she will sort of call me out on something, and she's like, "Well, you've done this since." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" She's like, "Well, this and this, and then when you were 12," and then I was like, "Okay, all right, data points acknowledged. You're right. I have, but you don't know, yeah, because you're being watched and you don't realize it."
I
Yeah,
mean, it's so valuable to have somebody who can do that. And with your siblings, it's not it's going to be one-on-one. It's not going to be embarrassing.
mhm,
It doesn't affect your work life. Doesn't
right.
necessarily affect your home family life. They can kind of help keep you on track.
Yeah. Okay, one more question. This one's from Aaron Mikulski, which is, what relationships have we mostly gotten right?
That's a good question. It's I think that varies person to person.
Mhm.
I think for, lately, it's like relationships have been hard for everybody because of the pandemic, but also, relationships in general have kind of taken a toll. We see a lot of the mental health issues and other stuff are tied to our very individualistic society.
Mhm.
And that doesn't mean that, things are awful. It just means that the onus is on us. Before, when you're part of a community, part of a religion, part of a family, part of a tribe, there are responsibilities and there are rights.
Mhm.
Now we don't really, call people out on, hey, you didn't help with the barn raising in the Amish community. Like, there's not that feeling of obligation, but
Mhm.
we kind of need that. It's like, we need to be responsible to our friends and, of course, to our family, and they need to be responsible to us. But it's kind of shifted, in the
Mhm.
same way. Before the internet, before everything, it's like, 1960s or whenever, the office used to close at 5 p.m. You
Right.
couldn't do work. Nobody was doing work. It was agreed upon. Now you can get online whenever. You can send emails whenever. So all of a sudden, like, work-life balance, yeah, I wrote about it in my first book. Work-life balance is an issue because you couldn't work 24/7 before. Now you can. So the onus is shifted on us to kind of draw a line and say, Saturdays, there will be no work. And the same thing
Mhm.
with friends. We don't have the kind of established rules that might exist, in what is expected in the 1950s bowling league. It's like, so we
Yeah.
need to kind of draw those for ourselves, and that's where it's tricky. But the best part is, if we do the work, then we can customize it.
Yeah, it goes back again, I think, to what you were talking about earlier with rituals, right?
Yeah,
That's a
yeah,
big part of sort of maintaining these friendships and these relationships.
yeah. If we the downside is, before, it was just there for us. Here's the
Mhm.
checklist. Here's what you need to do. The upside is, if you do that, if you establish it, if you're proactive, now it doesn't have to be this, like, rigid rules like being in the military. You can establish them for yourself. What works best for you and your friend? What works best for you and your family? You don't have to have these, like, doctrine prescriptions. You can
Mhm.
have something that's more flexible and customized.
Right. Well, let's talk a little bit about love too, because I feel like I mean, I know everyone talks about love, but you get into it and you can be a little pessimistic about it, which I appreciate as a contrarian that I am. And because friendship sounds pretty great, and love, meanwhile, sounds super complicated. So why bother with love? I mean, is there a better version of life where we just have friends and occasional hookups, or did I just reinvent my 20s? Like, what's going on?
I mean, it depends on the person, but it's like
Yeah.
we do derive so much from family, from being in that community, and also, your friends are going to get married, your friends are going to have kids, your friends are
Right.
going to be busy, and you're going to be left out. So it's, there is an issue of striking a balance there. But I don't like to think of it as pessimistic. I like to think of it as a lot of what we hear is way too rosy,
Right.
versus trying to be realistic about it in the modern age, because love has even been more affected by those issues of institutional breakdown, in the sense of we
That's
don't have
interesting.
those obligations, we don't have those rules, and so, and with love, there are more unspoken obligations. In the past, they used to be spoken, they used to be clear.
Right.
Now it's not as clear, but somebody's going to get angry if certain things don't happen, but those things aren't spelled out.
Right.
So that's really tricky, but it's like, again, the benefit of it, much like friendship, is we can customize it. That's why it's a cliche, but communication is so important, because we need to reestablish those rules. But if we do it right, we can customize them. And that's why talking with your partner, asking them hard questions, and I don't mean the typical hard questions. I mean asking them, what does marriage mean to you? What does a good partner mean to you? What is happiness to you? Because those are the things where you're working off a generalized assumption, versus hearing to them, this thing that you didn't think was that important is really important. That's critical to the relationship. And the only place you can get that answer is by asking your partner.
But interestingly, you say that couples therapy rarely works. But that's because you're not talking about talking couples therapy, you're just talking about talking with each other.
Yeah,
Right.
but the key reason from the research why couples therapy doesn't work is that most people wait way too long to go. Is that basically it's like it's not to be morbid, but it's the equivalent of oh, let's be morbid. But it's the equivalent of going to the doctor and hearing that the cancer is stage 4.
Right.
Like, it's like, if you would have gone to your checkup 3 years ago, we could have done something about this. Now it's too late. That's the issue with couples therapy, is people are usually, because I think it's like people have been having problems for, literally years before they show up. And it's just, these habits are too ingrained, and people they've already been through the screaming phase, and now they're into the living parallel live stage. And that's just too hard. That's why the communication needs to start early and often, because if something's, much like a doctor checkup, if something's a problem, you want to know about it early so you can address it.
Right. Well, are there any techniques for helping communication between couples before we're at the sort of blow everything up stage?
I mean, it's that kind of thing where, like I said, I think asking those hard questions, where it's kind of like, what does marriage mean to you? Those expectations, because they can be idiosyncratic as well. It's like, maybe to you, taking the trash out isn't a big deal. Maybe to your partner, that's a sign that you don't love them. That is a value that people idiosyncratically assign, and you can't like rewrite it for them or correct it for them, but you also wouldn't know. So it's like the biggest problem, John Gottman talks about this, is just that issue of, we stop, as time goes by, we stop having conversations with our partner and we start having conversations with ourselves. Oh, they did X, that means this. It's like, no. You need to ask them, if there's really an issue here, and to not wait until there's a problem. It's like to ask, it's like to ask, is there anything I could be doing that would make you happier? That's not a negative question. That's a positive question.
Right.
What could we do more often? That would like, we would enjoy to be more strategic about, hey, date
Hmm.
night's coming up. Let's not just default to the same old thing. What would
Hmm.
you really enjoy? You might really learn something.
Yeah. Um, it almost is, I mean, not to make this all about ritual, but it almost seems like this would be a good place to put something almost like this is going to sound really corporate and lame, but almost like a monthly couples meeting, right? Where you kind of just check in with each other and see what's going on, and if there's any issues, or I don't know.
Oh, I mean, it's like I think we haven't, like you're saying, I think we have a
Yeah.
knee-jerk resistance to formalizing those things.
Yeah.
What does couples therapy do? Like, it's like that's what it is. It's an appointment, and then typically things are made more routine. Sometimes
Hmm.
things are lacking. It's like to have that kind of talk. It doesn't need to be like, a meeting at the Hague. Like it can be like a very comfortable, fun conversation,
Hmm.
when you're making plans going forward. But to just inquire, to ask, to not rely on defaults. But
Hmm.
like to your point, rituals are key. It's like when we look at systems that work, like religions, like
Hmm.
government, like institutions, they have rituals. We have a society that has let some of those go.
Hmm.
For in many ways that was good, but we need rituals. But we in this current era, we need to create new ones that work better for us.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges too is that love is sort of in its own category where it's, I don't know, it's supposed to be kind of intuitive, right? And
Yeah.
creative and flow. And it's almost like this black box. And if you sort of analyze it, you kind of ruin it, right? It's a common idea.
I mean, I think that's very common, especially in early love. But I mean, if you're talking
Hmm.
about a long-term relationship,
Sure. Yeah.
everybody at that point, I think everybody starts to realize, you know, if we're not more deliberate, these things aren't going to
Hmm.
happen.
Right.
It's like, we'll change the diaper when we feel like it. It's like, no, 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 you're gonna do that now. I mean,
Right.
it's like that's I totally hear what you're saying, and I think
Hmm.
we are attracted to the intuitive issue, especially early on. But it's like if it's going to be sustained, these things need to happen. It doesn't need. You don't need to.
Hmm.
You don't need to dress formally and wear an ascot and take it seriously. Like, it doesn't have to be like cold and
Right.
awkward, but it can be conversations about like, hey, it's like, where should we go to the same place on vacation every year? It's
Hmm.
like what would improve this? Like the other thing I talk about in the book is in terms of improving your partner, it's like trying to change them isn't good, but trying to help
Hmm.
them be the person they want to be is wonderful, powerful. And so that idea of, hey, what would your ideal relationship be? And
Hmm.
then how can we move towards that? You know, I think once you frame it like that, to me, it sounds a lot less like cold and clinical, and it sounds a
Hmm.
lot more like here's somebody who's proactively trying to make you happier.
Right. Right. And you also wrote something which really resonated with me, which is about how um, just merely making time to be together isn't enough, right? If you need to do sort of exciting things, you need to do new things, kind of learn, have different experiences, or else it's kind of the same old, same old.
I mean, that's where the intuitive, kind of
Mhm.
ethereal idea around the magical love kind of breaks down.
Yeah.
Where it's like when people think, oh, we were in love, so we did exciting things. It's like, no, it goes both ways. You did exciting
Right.
things that made you fall in love. So it's
Yeah.
like to make sure that you're still doing those things and you don't fall into kind of like routine habits that are dull and
Hmm.
drab. It's like we all need, something new, something exciting. And that's pretty easy to do. Like if we just try, if we just ask, get
Hmm.
curious, and suggest things that would make us happier. It's like there's plenty of Venn diagram overlap to be exploited.
Right. And it can be really simple. I mean, I remember with my wife, I signed us up for a cooking class, but it was like a knife handling class. And it ended up being just a total disaster. The guy was just a nut. And
Yeah.
he was like constantly having people like grab his arm while he sliced so they could feel how effortless it was. It was a little weird, but it was funny and we had a good time. And, it was great. Just a change.
Well,
It
I
was a
mean,
one, it wasn't even expensive. It was just like $30 a person. It was nothing.
but that's critical because
Yeah.
people think like, oh, it might go wrong. It's like things that go wrong make the funniest stories,
Yeah.
and like, what's the counterfactual? The counterfactual is, oh, we did nothing. Like that,
Right.
it's like, that's not, doing something like going to a cooking class is very unlikely to destroy your relationship. It's like, it's not going to be bad, but it's a funny story. It's it's a crazy thing. It's just kind of like creating that library of memories
Mhm.
is really important. Like, we savor those, we really appreciate those. Nostalgia is underrated, and so to take the time to do those things, even if they don't work out, it's still fun and nice to be a couple that does things, as opposed to, like I said, the counterfactual, which is, yeah, Netflix and pizza again.
Right. Um, so when you're looking into the research for all of this, are you looking into ultimately sort of happiness? Is that what you feel? Does this all this roll up into happiness, like how to live a happy life? Do you feel, or is that too reductive?
I mean, I think there's, like, as I talk about in the end of the book, there's that
Mhm.
issue of meaning,
Right.
where it's, happiness in many ways is overrated. It's important, but like happiness in the moment, what the research shows there is happiness in the moment is usually fairly selfish. It's like, you're happy when you're eating an ice cream cone, you're happy when you're taking a nap. It's like, versus things that are meaningful, you know, you have to make tons of sacrifices for your kids, but that doesn't make you resent them. I mean, it's like, that makes you love them. It's like, it's that obligation, that ongoing, that issue of security comes from people relying on you, you relying on them. So like, for relationships, there's the health factors, which are so not obvious because they're so
Mhm.
gradual, but they matter. There's happiness where, yeah, we have enjoyment and pleasure in the moment. But there's also that critical issue of meaning, which, especially as we age, it's like, pleasure's fine, but it's kind of like big picture, like, why am I doing this? Does this matter? Like,
Mhm.
family, friends, kids, spouses, relationships, they're critical to that issue of, why am I doing this? Well, it's like, because I love these people and these people love me. And yeah, some things I'm going to have to do are not fun, but that's great because I like seeing them safe and happy and secure, and knowing that they're for me makes me safe, happy, and secure. So it's like, it's really powerful to go beyond the moment and to like really think about these more existential benefits.
Right. Yeah, that the classic sort of matchup of like hedonic happiness versus eudaimonic, meaning-based
Exactly.
happiness. When you need both, of course. You can't just live, one
Oh
or the
no,
other. Short-term versus
it's not all
long-term.
about duty.
Yeah, that gets pretty
It's
grim too.
yeah,
Yeah.
we're not going to focus. This isn't like Shoguns. We're not going to talk about honor, but like,
Right.
but there is that issue of just like, the goal with happiness. The danger is that the goal becomes like perpetual adolescence,
Right.
versus saying like, here's something sustainable that is like making everybody's life better, and that's going to involve responsibilities, but we also forget the benefit there, because it almost seems ironic. Like, those responsibilities say that you matter, they say that you're
Right.
important. People rely on you, not because they're parasitic, but because this shows you have value, like, you really mean and make a difference. And
Mhm.
that feeling, especially as we age, that becomes really critical. And family is such a great way for you to feel like, what am I doing? Does this matter? Does it? Yes, it does, because otherwise your kids wouldn't get to the dentist.
That's funny. I'm taking my son to the dentist tomorrow. That is close to home. But I do think that's in time. I was like, because there are so many, chores and things you have to do. And I think, yeah, but someone's got to take them to the dentist. Someone's got to make them dinner. Like you have to keep everyone alive and relatively healthy.
Yeah.
And it does give you a sense of purpose and meaning
Well,
and
I
connection.
mean, that issue, there's like momentary pleasure, but there's also pride,
Yeah.
where it's like, would your pride come from, you wouldn't believe how much TV I watched this weekend? It's like,
Right.
that's pleasurable, but it's like pride in, hey, my kids are happy, healthy, successful, they're doing really well. That's
Yeah.
an enormous source of like deeper, like richer, pride
Yeah.
and like fulfillment in your life.
Yeah, I have a very sort of easy rule of thumb I use when I want to sort of gauge whether to keep like indulging in a behavior, which is after I'm like, I sometimes I'll play a video game
Yeah.
and I'll get really hooked, and then I'll play and play until I beat it, and then when I'm done I'll think like, oh, what did I just do? Like, I just spent like 3 weekends beating this like game. I feel like an idiot. Whereas if you watch it's all about balance. If I watch one episode of a show, I'm like, that was nice. If I watch 3, I'm like, I'm a gross person.
No, it's the like a few potato chips are great. The entire
Right.
bag just makes you sick.
Exactly.
No, I had the
Yeah.
exact same. I used to work in the video game industry, and one day I remember on a Saturday, like waking up, through the window, I could see the sun shining, and I played this game. I played the game all the way through, and I look out the window, and the sun is down, and I'm like, what did I just do with my day? Like this was fun, but it was like it just started to straddle that line between like pleasurable and addiction, where it's like I need to do this, and now I'm like, was this a worthwhile use of my time? Like I don't really think shooting people in Call of Duty homeless, like it's like it didn't feel meaningful, and that was a big turning point for me.
Yeah, I had a moment when my daughter came in. She was, I think, 11 at the time. She's like, "Dad, you really like that samurai game?" I was like, "All right, I guess I'll stop playing the samurai game for a little while."
We get that kind of feedback where you're like, oh, okay, wait a second, there are, let's talk a little bit about phenomenology. It's a little bit outside of maybe not so good from the objective standpoint.
Exactly. All right. Well, Eric, thank you so much for joining me today and answering all these questions. The book is wonderful, and your newsletter is great too. I mean,
thank you so much.
I read it every time it comes out. I love it. I'm always so impressed with it and super entertained. You're a wonderful writer.
Oh, thank you very much, man. I appreciate it.
So thank you again for joining us. And for everyone who's watched, we've got Eric's book bite, and we've got his e-course, and of course his book itself, if you're a member. And if you don't have his book, go get his book because it's fantastic. Thanks, Eric.
Thanks, man.
Yeah.